Welcome to GenVisibility interview series. We bring visibility to our genesis, geniuses, genealogy, generosity, and gentleness. You may feel isolated or alone, but you are not. We are a vibrant, thriving, creative, and amazing community. We are adventurers, trendsetters, and trailblazers. If you want to be part of GenVisibility, please submit our form by visiting our website, genvisibility.com. Your voice matters, your story matters, and we cannot wait to see you shine.
Hi, welcome to GenVisibility interview series. You may feel isolated or alone, but you're not. We are a vibrant, thriving, creative, genius, gentle, and generous community. We are adventurers, trendsetters, and trailblazers. Your voice matters, your story matters. If you want to be part of GenVisibility, please submit our form by visiting our website, genvisibility.com. We cannot wait to see you shine. So, welcome, Jelly. Thank you for being here in this space. Thank you for agreeing to this interview with me.
Thank you, Ozi, for inviting me. This is such a pleasure, and I'm so excited to hear your story and have it shared. To get started, could you explain how we know each other and why we're doing this?
For sure. I guess, as I like to say, we know each other from life. Um, we collaborate in the company that you founded and that I am a core leader for in Creative Company, a community for creatives that has been so helpful for me and so supporting in the past year, especially going through the pandemic. Um, and I guess the story goes back to us taking a BNI training together, um, and me recognizing you were a designer, and in that sea of people pinging you, and then us spending the entire training DMing each other instead of paying attention to the training. And I love that story because it's just amazing how even in a crowd of strangers, we recognize our tribe and we are attracted to them. Um, so that's how we know each other. And the reason why we're doing this is because I believe in the importance of visibility, and I think you do as well. Um, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I know you pretty well, and I know that you do. Um, and I believe in the importance of sharing our stories. I have been moved personally by people sharing their own stories in so many ways, and I love doing this for people. Being genuine and not conforming to others' stipulations or constructs is the other way I can live my life. And I hope that by sharing a little bit about myself, I can inspire others to do the same.
Thank you, Ozi. Your story has really inspired me already, and that chat was so memorable. We actually chatted a lot about what we're going to talk about in the rest of this chat, so it feels like it's really coming full circle. To continue, can you tell me about your pronouns and how you identify in terms of gender?
For sure. My pronouns are they, le, she, and I identify as a non-binary person. And more specifically, I identify as trans femme and demi-fluid. So if you feel comfortable, would you share your personal pronouns, if any, and how do you identify in terms of gender?
Sure. My pronouns are she, her. And I actually noticed that on this platform, it prompts us for a name, and some platforms don't. We didn't add our pronouns to this. I'm not sure if it's showing on our screen for others to see right now, but that is something that I typically do add, and I think that it helps invite anyone else into the space to share theirs as well.
Yes, absolutely. I know what you mean. I it prompted me for my name. And I like on other platforms, I usually do my name and I do my pronouns as well. In this particular case, since I knew we were going to be discussing gender identity and pronouns, I didn't add them for some weird reason.
It seems like the one place we should have. I have my Zoom actually set to automatically show, but this is a new platform for me. So I noticed that you use more than one pronoun. Would you mind explaining that?
Yeah, for sure. So I use they pronouns as my non-binary pronouns when I'm speaking in English, and I use le as a non-binary pronoun when I'm speaking in Spanish, and I also use she pronouns. Um, and In terms of having different pronouns, multiple pronouns at the same time, I think I've heard people say that the pronoun that you list first is the one that you like the most. And I suppose this rings true to me. And I think we're getting more into gender identity than pronouns here. Um, because for me, pronouns, they live in what I call the realm of language. Um, so when I was younger, I used male pronouns. I was assigned male at birth. I didn't know about non-binary pronouns, but that didn't change my experience of growing up as a non-binary person. So today, my identity stands firmly in non-binary, mainly because I reject the notion that this binary exists. Um, so in a way, I think of my identity as non-binary as a social and political stand in rejection of that binary, because I understand this gender binary as an extension of the patriarchy, in the sense that the patriarchal hegemony, to survive, it needs to determine this duality of someone who is on top and then someone who's on bottom, like rich versus poor, stronger and then someone who's weaker. There, someone always needs to be more than for others to be less than. And I don't really align myself with this notion. For example, I don't think that there is good nor bad. To me, there is only different. So I guess that's the reason why I list my non-binary pronouns first. On the other hand, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, on the other hand, I feel fully satisfied sexually and validated when I am treated as a woman. Um, and I only started being comfortable with using she pronouns outside of sexual relations very recently. And the more I use them, the more comfortable I feel with them. However, this doesn't change who I am. I am a non-binary person, and I don't think pronouns change that.
Yeah, it's interesting to just write something down, start telling people, and feel it out. And you can always change that if it's not the feeling that you thought that it would be. So that's beautiful to come into that. Can you explain some other aspects of your identity? I think you said trans femme and demi. So what does that mean?
Right. So I think all identities, they are very personal. So for me, and I don't want to speak for anyone else who identifies as trans femme or demi, but for me, trans femme means that the overlap of my non-binary identity with the feminine part of the spectrum is larger than with other parts of the spectrum. Um, and then I identify as demi-fluid, because the non-binary and the femme aspects of my identity, they are somewhat static, I would say. But the rest of my gender identity fluctuates, or some people may say they are fluid. and they are fluid between genderqueer and the masculine parts of the spectrum. Um, and these are all just different aspects of my identity. I also identify as Latin American. I'm also a sibling, a spouse, a dog's human, a designer, an immigrant. So yeah, there's many different aspects of my identity that overlap in that way.
And the next thing I'd like to talk about is your move to New York. So I know that this was a very poignant moment in your life and something that you were able to find more acceptance and validation in your identity. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, like I mentioned, I am Latin American and I am an immigrant. Um, I moved from Costa Rica to New York in 2016. Um, and yeah, moving to New York was definitely very significant, mostly in terms of safety. Um, I feel very safe here in New York, and I have been to other places in the United States and around the world, but I think that specifically in New York, I feel very safe. And in Costa Rica, when I was outside in public, whenever someone approached me, there was always that question in my mind of, are they approaching me because they're going to assault me, or are they just looking for directions, or do they just want to ask like some random question? And here in New York, that question doesn't exist. Of course, it's not 100% safe. I'm aware of that, and I make sure that I don't put myself in dangerous situations. But whenever strangers approach me, that mental process it doesn't exist in my mind. So, and I think that there's also a huge difference when it comes to acceptance. Um, and I think the key term here is public acceptance. Um, when I was living in Costa Rica, I was accepted by a small circle of friends, um, and it went from being accepted by a small circle of friends to getting that acceptance pretty much everywhere and in a very public way. Um, and the other aspect of it also got reversed. In Costa Rica, when I was in public, I found that most people would mock me or reject me or just, I just got used to ignoring them, but it was always there. And here in New York, even though it still happens, sometimes people point and laugh and they make fun. Um, it's a very small amount of people, so it went from being the majority to being the minority. Um, and also in terms of validation, I find that in Costa Rica, I was mostly validated during sex, and it was always done in private, and there was always shame associated with it. When I was younger, I guess you could say I dated men who validated me only behind closed doors, and I was lucky if in public they acted like they didn't know me. Um, but here in New York, that is not the case. I find that most people are not only happy to validate me, but they're almost eager to do it, and very publicly. So it's been uh, it's been really significant for me in terms of my identity and how I express myself.
So happy that you were able to find New York, and it's kind of the place where you can let your freak flag fly, and it flies with most people. I felt that too, being in a box for most of my life, that I conformed, and I had to conform for another 4 years in New York, which I think is something a little bit about working in corporate America, like an experience that you had too. But when you're
Hmm.
able to let yourself melt into the rest of the melting pot in New York, it's a really beautiful moment to find yourself. And so I'm glad that you're able to find that. So was coming to New York, was that the moment that you came out publicly? Do you want to talk a little bit about your coming out experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So coming out, I guess it's a tricky answer. I guess it's a two-part answer for me. Um, because I guess first of all, I don't believe in coming out per se. Um, I believe that through queer liberation means not having to come out. Um, and I think that coming out, it's a ritual that has been imposed to our community by the heteronormative society. And whenever I think about mostly young people having to come out, it always hurts. I think about the level of anxiety and sometimes even depression and just being constantly worried about it. And I think about young people going through that and always having to think about that as opposed to um, being able to just be kids and be happy and be out with friends. And it's not something that kids who happen to be heterosexual have to go through. So I think it puts our community in disadvantage. Um, so me personally, I have never bothered with going through the quote unquote ritual of coming out. I have always been mostly focused in just living my life. Um, but also and I guess this is the second answer to the question. Um, I come out constantly. Every time I introduce myself to new spaces, every time I introduce myself to strangers, I come out every single time. Sometimes multiple times in a day. Um, and I also feel that as uh, as a demi-fluid person, I just don't think I could ever, or I could, but it wouldn't make sense for me to come out and then moving through the spectrum and then coming out again. It would be just very confusing. I used to, just to explain that a little, I used to modify the way I presented digitally. Um, and so, for example, I used to change my pronouns in my email signature constantly, sometimes multiple times a day. And I used to go from they, she to they, them to all pronouns to they, she, he, or like, and somehow when I was doing that, that felt very relevant. That felt like something I needed to do, and it just I felt like I needed to change my pronouns to match how I felt at the moment. Um, but after a time of doing that, I think it has lost its significance. Um, and you mentioned um, using your pronouns on Zoom, and I think that um, for someone who's demi-fluid, there's been occasions where I go into calls or when I go into meetings, and those pronouns don't reflect how I feel at the time. So there's always that uncertainty of like, do I change them? Does it matter? Is anyone really paying attention? Do I really want to go through that again? So, uh, and I think I'm not the only person who has been unintentionally outed by using pronouns on Zoom, because I have jumped from spaces where I feel very accepted and very validated, like the meetings that we have with in Creative Company, to places where that is not the case, and um, my pronouns are there for everyone to see, and I'm not ashamed of it, but I'm also very aware that these are persons that I haven't shared that part of myself with, and there's always that question of how will they react, or will they even mention it?
That's something I just learned too, through you speaking there, is that when you changed your pronouns so many times for every different meeting, for me coming into this initially, I had thought that maybe it was harder for me to keep track of, because in the beginning of when we met, less than a year ago, you had been changing it up more. And I had to take an extra second to think like, oh, why did they change again? So now I'm learning why, which is really interesting. And it's just something for others to be able to think about, that that's not set in stone. Did you use work as a tool of being able to change up your identity too? When you have switched jobs, was that an opportunity? Can you tell me about like what it was like working in New York?
Well, I think opportunity is not the right, no, it's not how I would describe it. So when I moved here to New York, I I started working as mostly a temp, and I started working as a freelancer. Um, I applied for full-time jobs, but I just felt that I liked the liberty of being a freelancer and just having exposure to different industries and different spaces. I appreciated that a lot. Um, and it was definitely an opportunity to meet so many people that I value and that I am still in contact with. But I think to go back to what you mentioned about working in corporate spaces, these corporate spaces I think are part of this system where everything is so compartmentalized and there's so much structure, that I guess it didn't allow for the flexibility or the fluidity that I needed at the time. And so especially going from one job to another, I can sometimes in a matter of a week I was going to a different place, or in a month I was introducing myself in a new office, and there was a lot of worrying and a lot of apprehension to how will they react. Also, I kept asking myself, is it really worth it to do this, to ask for these people to make an adjustment in the way they work and the way they talk, the way they speak to me, and for a little amount of time. I also wondered if it was going to affect whether or not they were going to hire me again. Um, I am aware that it is a big demand to make, when you join a team and you ask everyone um, to learn something that perhaps they haven't been introduced to, and also unlearn, not assuming and not going by assumptions, but asking and um, just remembering that that I use non-binary pronouns, for example. Um, and there was also the aspect that, like I said, corporate, it's so structured that the way I was introduced to these places and these companies was through an HR department, and I have a name that was assigned to me at birth, and I have my real name. Um, and so, for instance, they would create email addresses for me, and those email addresses used my legal name, the name that I was assigned at birth. So um, even to the people that I introduced myself with my real name, Ozi, they were using an email address that reflected my uh, the name that was assigned to me at birth. So I don't think they ever meant any harm, but I think perhaps just because they wanted to seem formal or just because they wanted to be respectful, they used the name that they thought was the formal way to approach me. Um, so it was uh, it was always a bit of a struggle having to bring that up to people in HR, and sometimes there was the answer was no. The answer was no. We need to go with your legal name because that's how we do things here in HR, basically.
Yeah, and I want to make something known that you taught me is that this is not a nickname. This is you identify this as your real name, which was something I learned. How has
Yes.
your family taken to you using a different name that you weren't assigned at birth, and how has your family reacted to everything else that they've learned?
Um, so my family doesn't use my real name. I think that the the experience with my family is very similar to, or I mean, my family is in Costa Rica, so it's the same experience I had when I was living in Costa Rica. Um, it was acceptance behind closed doors, but it was never public. Um, and it always felt sort of like we'll we'll deal with it because we have to. Um, and I learned the difference between acceptance and celebration or affirmation. Um, I don't think acceptance is enough. I think that everyone deserves to be celebrated. Um, so I think that's the experience. It's the same that the experience I had in Costa Rica.
And what about your relationship with your family now? Do you want to talk a little bit about your relationship with your husband too?
Um, sure. I think it it is a work in progress, and I guess you could say everything in life is a work in progress. As I like to remind myself, change is the only constant in our multiverse. So um, we we keep going through changes, and it is still a work in progress. So I think perhaps I would rather not to elaborate too much. Um, but I guess the best way I can describe the relationship with my family is um, by telling you that I very rarely use the word family. Um, I don't have a good relationship with that word. Um, and I have a bad reaction when people who are not blood related to me call themselves my family. Um, it is reminiscent to workplaces uh, using it as a way of manipulation, as a way of insinuating or trying to convey that you owe them loyalty or even more than that. So I use the word friends a lot. Um, Everyone who calls me by name, I call them a friend. And um, I think even when I was younger and I was using my birth name, the that distinction has always been very clear and very present in my life. Um, I use the word friend for people who I choose to have in my life and for the ones who celebrate me as who I am.
It's so important to pay attention to those the little words that make such a difference. And as you've taken space and taken time to explain all of this, you really are able to focus in on those words, whether it's a name, whether it's a pronoun, whether it's the word family. You do such a good job of that. Do you have any advice to other people who are in non-supportive environments?
Sure, I think my advice is that if you can, just definitely find a way to talk about it. Don't keep it to yourself. I think being ignored is one of the most hurtful things I have ever had to gone through. And so definitely don't ignore yourself. Acknowledge your feelings. And again, if you can, just try to find someone to talk to about it. So if you're underage, for example, and if you're in the US, reach out to the Trevor Project. They have phone lines. They do text. They even have like a social media forum that you can join. If you're an adult, I would suggest PFLAG. If you're in the US, there's most likely a chapter that you can join. And of course, feel free to drop us a line in our contact at GenVisibility.com. We're always here to listen and we'll get back to you as fast as we can.
That's great. To backtrack to when you were talking about your experience as a non-binary person, I'm curious what you meant by that, to specify a little more.
Sure. So, experience as a non-binary person, I think, like I mentioned, it is for me. It is a very firm stand against a social construct, and it's also a political stand against the patriarchy. It happens to be, and this is something that I have talked to with other people who identify as non-binary. And I think I keep finding that we have so similar experiences that I started referring to it as the non-binary experience, but I realized that it's not a monolith. So I wanna express it as my experience as a non-binary person. So to explain, ever since I was a kid, I always shared space with mostly women. My best friends, they were women. the people who supported me, they were always women. The people who I learned from, they were mostly women. The people who I admired, they were women. And I was very privileged that I was welcome in their spaces as an equal. But because I was assigned male at birth, I was also in spaces that were exclusive for men. And sometimes by choice, even though in very few cases it was mostly forced on me, like locker rooms or just changing rooms or any space where there's that divide of like a binary gendered space. I'm usually forced into the space that is meant for men because especially when I was a kid. And again, when I talked about this with other non-binary persons, all the people who I spoke with, we all agree that there's always such a clear difference between those spaces, spaces that are embracing and accepting. It's usually spaces where women are at, and spaces that are meant for men are usually filled with competition. There's a lot of aggression, there's a lot of violence, and not necessarily towards me, but just in general, there's a level of aggression and violence that you don't experience when you are surrounded by women. And I also get to experience how the space changes as soon as a man is introduced into a woman's space. It is not the same. I get to experience what it feels like to just be surrounded by women and accepted as an equal. And as soon as a man enters that space, it's just different. I really have no words to explain it right now, but the same thing happens when you're in a space filled with men and they think of you as a man, even though you're not, but they think of you as one. And as soon as a woman enters the space, it's a completely different experience. So that's what I call the non-binary person experience, even though it's my own experience.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. So I know that you have learned a lot through your years on this earth, and you are looking towards the future too. So what do you want to focus on, and what do you want to achieve in the future?
The future happens to be usually where I'm focused on, and I'm not going to talk about it because it's way too long. But yes, my focus is it tends to be primarily on the future. I mean, the future that I want and what I envision is through queer liberation to start with, and I use queer as an umbrella term. I had a discussion with a friend very recently, a very dear friend of mine, and she's queer, so we talk about this kind of subjects a lot, and she explained to me and she reminded me how queer is sometimes it can be a hurtful term for other persons. So I just want to say that my intention by using queer is not to hurt anyone. I simply never experienced that word as it being pejorative. I learned it as when I learned it as a powerful and celebratory term. So um, that's how I use it, and uh, and I have worked towards queer liberation. For instance, in some cases it has been more successful than others, but I have worked as a volunteer for Pride. I have worked with Gender Conference. I have worked in shelters. I think that those are the spaces where I can make a difference personally. Um, I also envision a future without prisons. I want us to abolish prisons. I think that punishment, as opposed to education, it's something that falls within the framework of the patriarchal system. And as a society, I think I definitely want us to think more about education and rehabilitation and to stop focusing on punishing each other. Um, and I also want to legalize sex work. I want us to get rid of that notion that it is somehow demeaning work and that it is not valid. Um, there's so many things. I want to get rid of the wage gap, put more women in power, um, eliminate the predominance of those linear economies, and perhaps focus on circular economies. And I guess another big thing is ecological justice and sustainability. I know we have talked about this before. You are passionate about that as well. But I really want us to stop thinking about sustainability as those little actions that we can take and thinking that that's how we're going to make a difference. I think those actions are definitely important, but I want more of us to be aware that in order to um, just reverse this climate emergency we're under, we need legislation. I recently learned in a webinar. I think I don't know if you were there. Remember the sustainable graphic design webinars that we both attended? There was another one recently, and I was there, and uh, it was mentioned that it was BP, the oil company, that created the term carbon footprint, and they created the first way to count your carbon footprint, so that it's these companies that are responsible for the majority of the pollution that happens in our world, they keep like throwing it on us, on the consumers, as if we were responsible. But I want us to focus on just creating legislation to just make it so that these companies that are the ones that disproportionately pollute our world, to make it illegal for them to do that. And of course, to keep doing those small things that we all do, because it really does matter. But I think that those small things, they seem like that's a way to fix the climate emergency, mostly for people who are not directly affected by the climate emergency. For the people living in areas where there is that are disproportionately affected, those little actions are not even an option in many cases. They don't have access to it. So yeah, I think that's definitely a part of the future I envision. And well, as you know as well, uh, especially since we met each other, I have been focusing on making the internet more accessible and inclusive. Um, for me, it became very clear and very it it just it made a lot of sense that it's something that I needed to focus on because for so many of us, the internet is such a vital aspect of our life. Uh, Many of us could not imagine our life without the internet. And yet, I did this too. We go through life just being okay with the fact that not everyone has equal rights of access and experience to it. And it really hinders someone's ability to prosper when you deny them of that access or that equal experience. So that's that's something that I have been focused on, and I want us to have an internet which is a space that gives everyone the same amount of access and the same amount of experience, the equal experience to everyone.
I'm so blessed to be able to see you putting all of these activations into action almost every day, and taking the step to do this chat also. Just opening your voice up to that many more souls that are going to make such a great impact on this world.
Thank you.
That's more on the global scale too, but more on a personal level. Is there anything that you wish that you could do but can't do?
On a personal level, yeah, I mean, I a lot of these, as you call them, activations, they do affect me personally. I I have not been aware of them my entire life, so when I become aware of them, I do think of them as part of my personal duty to do something to change them. But in a more personal level, something that if I had like a magic wand and if I could change it right away, I would live a gender dysphoria free life. I think it it bothers me how much it affects me and the fact that I have no control over it. Um, it's it's something that if I could, I would change it in a second. Um, and also, I guess from my experience of being an immigrant, and particularly an immigrant from Latin America, if I could, I would just make it so that people stop referring to Latin Americans as Hispanic. Um, I think there's a huge level of erasure in that. There's entire countries like Brazil, Haiti, not to mention areas where people who are First Nation people live that are not Hispanic. Um, and it started even before I moved here when I was going through my application for a green card. The word is constantly there. You're always asked to identify your ethnicity, and um, it is just in black and white. It's printed in every paper. It says Hispanic, and it's also the only option for you if you are a person from Latin America and you are black, for example. The option is black and then not Hispanic in parentheses, or I think they also say Asian and not Hispanic, because in Latin America, like in most of the world, there's diversity. There's black people. I mean, it's just the same as here as in the US. However, that's the identity that is chosen for you, and I don't think it's the right word to use because it erases people that are not Hispanic. I feel for and I hurt for people who are asking for a green card and are in places that are not Spanish speaking because that word doesn't represent them. Um, and I think another thing that I would change if I could right away is um, the fact that us humans we think of ourselves as something that lives outside of nature. Uh, the idea of like artificial and natural, it makes very little sense to me because as part of nature, everything that we create is part of the natural world. So for me, cities are just as natural as an anthill, for example. And I think it's so hurtful for us to create that division and to distance ourselves from nature because it allows us to act in ways that hurt the world just because we don't consider ourselves part of nature. Um,
Yeah,
so I
humans
know
are definitely a part of nature. We're made of it. Uh, I wish we could
exactly.
realize that more too. And also going back to, you were talking about choosing Hispanic versus Latino and other differentials there. I know that the White House recently added a third gender option to their form right after Biden was elected. And you said to me, now if only they could implement that into every other government document. So hopefully we are getting there past this binary world. But people like you speaking your voice are definitely taking one step closer. So I
Thank
know that we're
you.
nearing the end of this, and I know that you have a special way that you want to finish this interview. Do you want to share that?
Yes, I know that you love affirmations. So I wanted to ask if it's okay for us to just say affirmations for each other.
Sure. I have a great one in mind.
I have one as well.
Okay, perfect.
Who goes first?
You go first.
All right. So, do you want to repeat after me?
Perfect.
All right. So, I am already everything I needed to become.
I am already everything I needed to become.
A part of the multiverse, a reflection of the divine.
A part of the multiverse, a reflection of the divine.
All the right people and opportunities flow to me.
All the right opportunities and people flow through me.
I have made space for them in my life.
I have made space for them in my life.
I am magic.
I am magic.
Thank you.
Oh, that was beautiful. I'd love to rewatch this and repeat those again. I only have
Okay.
one on the top of my mind. It is, I am enough.
I am enough. That's a great one. Thank you so much for doing this, Yeli. This has been so great. And I want to finish by saying to everyone, thank you for being here and for listening or reading. We hope you are feeling inspired to share your own experience and reality. And if you like this video, please share it. You can follow us and learn about our latest interviews on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And remember that you are valued, you are loved, we see you. Thank you again, Yeli.
Thank you, Ozi. So good seeing you.
So great to see you. See you again real soon.
Thank you for being here and for listening. We hope you are feeling inspired to share your own experience and reality. If you like this video, please share it. You can follow us and hear about our latest video on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And remember that you are valued, you are loved, we see you.